Hello, fellow crafters. This is Yana Smakula for SimonsSTM.com. Welcome back for another Yippee for Yana video. It's been a while since I've last done a card with a stamped pattern, a floral pattern, and I thought it was about time to do that. Today I have this new stamp set from Simon. This is Best Friend Ever. It's from the latest release from Simon Says Stamp. And I love that this set features 4 different floral clusters. You have so many different options with this set. And I figured I would use one of the florals, one of those clusters, to make a floral pattern for my card today. So here I'm starting by using my large MISTI stamping tool. I've positioned a panel of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. This is cut to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and it will make the front of my card. And I have already picked a sentiment for my card from another new set from Simon. Now, I will later change this sentiment a little bit as I didn't exactly like how my stamping went, but I wanted to show you this starting point just in case you wanted to make a 1-layer card. So I'm starting by stamping a sentiment, and I'm using my Hero Arts Intensified black ink, and I'm double or even triple stamping this to have that nice black outline. And I'm actually going to double stamp all of my images today. It's actually become quite a habit, and even if my impression is perfect, I still tend to double or triple stamp the image. I don't know why, but I mean, it doesn't hurt to do that. So next I'm going to use the floral cluster and stamp it around that sentiment, forming a pattern or a floral background. Now, if you don't want to have a sentiment directly on the background, you can just skip that step and go ahead and start by stamping the floral cluster right away. I'm going to stamp this image about 4 times, partially coming in from each of the corners of this panel, and then I'll use just portions of this image to fill in any gaps that I have on the background. I'm going to rotate my panel, rotate the stamp a little bit, close the lid of my MISTI, pick it up, ink it up, and stamp it again to have that cluster stamped in the top right-hand side corner of the panel. I love to stamp my own patterns. You can take pretty much any stamp and create any background, any pattern you like using that. And that's the beauty of using individual stamps. I do love background stamps, but I also love the freedom that I have with the individual stamps because I can build any pattern I want. I can combine the stamps however I like. And overall, it's just fun. I love to stamp patterns like this. It's always fun to spend an hour in my craft room coming up with a different pattern, with a different background, and just playing with my supplies. Now, I stamped that second cluster a little bit too closely to the sentiment, and that's why I didn't like it. That's why I later felt I needed to have a different panel. That's why I felt I needed to stamp the sentiment on another panel and then foam mount it on the card. But had I not stamped it that closely to the sentiment, I probably would have kept my panel as is with all of the beautiful stamping and the sentiment nestled in between the floral images. I am trying to clean my stamp every time I make an impression just to make sure that I don't stain the background, that I don't leave any ink marks on the background. I'm not being very careful. I'm not using my stamp cleaning solution or anything like that. I'm just basically using another piece of cardstock to wipe that stamp clean. Now that we have the background stamped, it's time to do some coloring. Now, I went ahead and used some of my favorite Copic marker colors to do this stamping. Here I'm using the RV34 as my darkest pink, and I will use the pinks, the teals, or I should probably say the light blues, and the green colors for this card. So that's the color combination that I'm going for. Pink, blue, with a little hint of teal, and dark green. Oh, and also a little bit of yellow. Next color I'm using is RV11. This is my medium pink, and I'm just extending that dark pink a little bit into the flower petal, and then finally using the RV00 marker to extend the color even further and color saturate the entire flower. So most of my flowers are going to be pink. The little flowers are going to be yellow, and then I'm coloring the large leaves blue or teal using the BG45 marker as my darkest color, and then the B000 as my lightest color. I really like how these two colors blend, and I always like the combination of pink and teal. I think that's very classy, and it's very I don't know, it's very modern. Next to color the leaves, I decided I wanted to use very dark greens, and for that I'm using G99 as my darkest color, G94 as my medium color, and then YG63 as my lightest color. Although you can totally skip the G94 color as the leaves are quite small, quite tiny, and you really don't need to use the 3 shades of the green to have beautiful coloring. So here's what this pattern looks like now. I just have the tiny yellow flowers left, and I'm not going to add any shading to these. I'm just using one single marker. This is Y15 to add a solid layer of yellow. I know I will be adding a highlight to these flowers using a white pen, so I'm not concerned about adding dimension or adding shading to these using my markers. And as I finish coloring this background, you can tell that it looks pretty nice. It's a nice and colorful floral pattern, but that sentiment, it's just not stamped in the right spot. The sentiment is stamped a little bit too closely to the floral cluster that's coming in from the top right hand side corner, and that has been bothering me all the time I was stamping the background and all the time I was coloring it. So I was trying to come up with a different way to have a sentiment on this card, but still have a large portion of this background show on the finished card. Now, before I jump to fixing the sentiment, I wanted to show you the part where I'm adding the highlights to this background. I'm using my Sakura Jelly Roll pen in size 10 for the biggest flowers, and then I'll use the size 5 for the little leaves, as the leaves are smaller and I wanted to have a smaller white highlight. And I'm just basically adding a highlight to every single image on this pattern. I really like to do that lately with my white pen. It just adds another layer of interest to the card, I think. Now, to fix that sentiment, I went ahead and I die cut a circle from white cardstock. And now I'm just going to re-stamp the same sentiment on top of that circle, a little bit off to the top. Now, I do plan to add another sub-sentiment below this. So the main sentiment says, "Thank you, friend." And I'm going to add a smaller sentiment at the bottom that says, "Just because, and just because of I value our friendship." I'm going to stamp that in light gray, just so that it's not as dark as the main sentiment. Now, the sentiments that I'm using today come from the Insight Friendship Messages stamp set. It's also a new stamp set from Simon, and it is fabulous. It has lots of large, meaningful sentiments for friends. There's best friend forever, I'm here for you, love you, friend. And there are a lot of additional sentiments that you can stamp on the inside of the card. Now, I am actually using one of the inside sentiments on the front of my card, and you can also do that. It doesn't mean that you have to stamp that sentiment on the inside. Although I really love that option, as I often struggle with the things to put on the inside of my card. So I'm really glad that there's this stamp set that can help me add a meaningful sentiment, a meaningful message to the inside of my card. Having finished stamping the sentiment circle, I felt like I needed to add a little bit more yellow color to this background. I had a lot of the yellow flowers more towards the bottom, but I didn't have any yellow flowers at the top, and that sort of looked odd. So I went ahead and I stamped another floral cluster on a separate piece of paper. I colored just a part of that cluster where the yellow flowers were. I cut it out using a coordinating die, and yes, there is a coordinating die available. And I then went ahead and used a circle die to die cut a circle edge to this cluster. This way, I could just go ahead and foam mount that onto my sentiment circle. Now, if you didn't want to do that, you can just stamp that same image directly onto the sentiment circle above the sentiment and skip having to die cut it, and then skip having that additional layer in your card. So that's another option for you. I quite like to have my cards dimensional, so I often use extra foam adhesive on my projects to give a little bit of extra dimension to my projects. I also added the same white highlights to that additional image that I just adhered, as I wanted it to look the same as the rest of the images. And then I foam mounted the circle onto my card. Now, to finish this card, I envisioned the big pink flowers having white flower centers. And for that, I went ahead and I used my Nuvo drops in white, and I just added teeny tiny white dots onto each of the flower at the end of the stamen. You can't really see that. It doesn't really show much, but if you run your fingers across the card, you can have that tactile experience. You can feel those raised dots in the background, and I love that. It's a simple card, super simple to make. It's an old technique, making a floral pattern using a single floral stamp, but it's something that I absolutely love to do. Well, that's it for me for today. I hope you found this video useful. If you make a card inspired by this video, we'd love it if you shared your project online and tagged us on social media. We always love seeing what you guys are making. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet done so. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next time. Love you guys. Bye.